"You're our dad," the two children told the Mafia boss in the elevator, right in front of his most trusted enforcer. The private elevator of Blackwood Tower hummed softly as it rose toward the 50th floor. Harrison Blackwood, the man they called the Reaper, the Shadow King who controlled every illegal operation from Boston to Washington, D.C., stood utterly still in his black three-piece suit. Beside him stood Sterling Cross, his right-hand man for 15 years, speaking in a low, professional voice about Knox Valentine's latest territorial threat. The elevator slowed and stopped at the 25th floor, and the doors slid open. Two children stepped inside, a boy of about 7 with gray eyes that looked too steady, too assessing, and a girl who held a worn teddy bear close to her chest, red ribbons tied into her dark hair. They did not reach for the panel, did not press a single button, as if they already knew exactly where they were going. They simply lifted their faces and stared up at Harrison. The girl's small hand found her brother's sleeve, tugging once as though to anchor herself, and she whispered, "That's him, Jasper. That's our dad." The boy stepped forward. "You're our dad, Harrison Blackwood. We finally found you." Harrison's hand froze in his pocket. Sterling's fingers twitched toward his concealed gun instinct before catching himself. These were children. "Excuse me?" Harrison's voice was ice, the same tone he used before destroying empires. "Mom has your picture." The girl hugged her teddy bear tighter. "In her nightstand. Your name was on the back." Jasper unfolded a paper Harrison's Fortune magazine cover next to a crayon drawing. A tall man in black holding hands with 2 small figures and a woman. "We took the subway from Brooklyn. Mom doesn't know we're here. We just wanted to meet you. Just once." Sterling stared at his boss. "You have kids? Have you ever had a moment when your entire world shifted? When everything you built, the power, the empire, the fear you commanded suddenly meant nothing compared to 2 small faces looking up at you with hope?" Harrison's mind went blank. He had no children, never wanted them. His life was violence and control. The last thing he needed was weakness. The last thing he needed was something someone could use against him. But the boy's face. The gray eyes Harrison saw every morning in the mirror. The exact arch of his eyebrows. And the timeline. 8 years ago. Pearl Ashford, the waitress with the warm smile at that upscale bar. Late nights, shared whiskey, conversations that made him feel human. Then the Moreno War erupted. The ambush that nearly killed him. When he finally went back to find her, she was gone. Vanished without a trace. He'd assumed she wanted out. He'd been wrong. Harrison lowered himself slowly, eye level with the children. Sterling stepped back. In 15 years, he'd never seen his boss kneel for anyone. "What's your mother's name?" "Pearl Ashford," the girl said proudly. "She owns a bakery in Brooklyn. She talks about you sometimes. She said you were strong. She said you didn't know about us." "We don't need anything," Jasper added quickly. "We just wanted to know if you were real." The elevator chimed past the 45th floor. Sterling cleared his throat. "Boss, the situation with Knox. Handle it yourself." Sterling froze. Harrison Blackwood controlled everything personally. Every decision. Every move. "I said handle it. Family matter. Family matter." In 15 years, Sterling had never heard him use that word. Harrison pressed the lobby button. The elevator descended. As they dropped past floor after floor of the empire he'd built with blood, Harrison felt something crack open inside him. Something locked away so long he'd forgotten it existed. "Are you surprised to see us?" the girl asked. A sound escaped him, almost a laugh. "Very. I didn't know you existed until 2 minutes ago." "But you're not mad?" Jasper's voice wavered slightly. "No." Harrison meant it more than anything in years. "Not mad, just processing." The lobby doors opened. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, employees avoiding eye contact with their boss. None of them had any idea that 2 7-year-olds had just done what rival gangs, federal agents, and assassins had failed to do for 20 years: catch Harrison Blackwood completely off guard. "Where does your mom think you are?" "School," both twins said guiltily. Harrison checked his Rolex. 3:30. Pearl would know they were missing. She would be terrified. "Sterling, car, now." "Where are we going?" Harrison watched his children walking ahead, Ruby pointing at the fountain, Jasper keeping a protective hand near her elbow. So small, so brave, so vulnerable in a world full of people who would hurt them just to hurt him. "Brooklyn. We're finding their mother." Sterling fell into step beside him. "Boss, if this is real, everyone will find out. Knox. The feds. Everyone. They'll be targets. I know. What are you going to do? Harrison's gray eyes hardened. The Reaper awakening. Whatever it takes. And for the first time in 20 years, the man who feared nothing was afraid. Not of enemies, not of death, but of failing two small people who had found him in an elevator and changed everything. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more tales of love and redemption. The glossy black Rolls-Royce came to a stop in front of a small bakery on a quiet street in Brooklyn. The sign read Sweet Pearl Bakery, with a white pearl shimmering beneath the soft light of dusk. Harrison looked through the car window, his heart pounding harder than it ever had when facing an enemy. Sterling killed the engine, glanced at his boss in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The two children in the back seat had already started to squirm with excitement, Ruby hugging her stuffed bear pepper tight, her eyes shining. This is Mom's shop. Mom makes the best waffles in the world. Jasper flung open the door before anyone could react, grabbed his little sister's hand, and took off toward the bakery. Harrison stepped out of the car and paused for a second, watching the two small figures run. His children. The thought was still too new, too strange, for him to fully take in. Inside the bakery, warm yellow light spilled through the glass, and then he saw her. Pearl Ashford stood behind the counter, a phone pinned between her shoulder and ear, her hand trembling as she flipped through the pages of a notebook. Her panicked voice carried all the way to the sidewalk. Yes, I know school lets out at 3:15, but my child isn't on the bus. Please check again. Please. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. This was the deepest terror a mother can know, the terror of not knowing where her child is. The bakery door flew open. Ruby and Jasper burst in like two small whirlwinds. Mom, I found Dad. Pearl dropped the phone. She crumpled to her knees, pulling both children into her arms, holding them so tightly it was hard to breathe. Where did you go? I was terrified. Do you have any idea how worried I was? Her voice was anger and tears, relief and panic all tangled together. Ruby kissed her mother's cheek. I'm sorry, Mom, but Jasper and I found Dad. He's out there. Pearl lifted her head, and time stopped. Harrison Blackwood stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light from outside. 8 years. 8 years since the last time she had seen that face. He had changed. The features that used to soften when he was with her had hardened into stone. The gray eyes that once held a rare warmth when they looked at her were now cold as steel. Black hair, touched with silver at his temples. A perfectly tailored black three-piece suit. He looked more dangerous, more powerful, and more distant than she had ever known him to be. But they were still those eyes. The eyes that had haunted her dreams for 8 long years. The eyes she saw every day on Jasper's face. Pearl rose slowly, instinctively drawing the children behind her. Not out of fear, out of fury. 8 years of buried anger erupted now like a volcano. Go to the back room. Now. Her voice didn't tremble. It was cold, final, absolute. But Mom, Dad just got here. Ruby tried to protest. Right now. Ruby looked at Harrison, then at her mother, her lower lip beginning to quiver. Jasper understood more than his sister did. He took Ruby's hand and pulled her along. Come on, Ruby, let the adults talk. When the back room door shut, Pearl turned to Harrison. The brown eyes that had once been gentle now burned like fire. What do you want here, Blackwood? Not Harry, not Harrison. Blackwood, his last name, like a wall between them. Harrison stepped into the bakery and closed the door behind him. I want to know why I'm only finding out I have children. After 7 years. You don't have the right to ask. Pearl stood tall, refusing to take even a single step back. You disappeared 8 years ago. Not a word, not a message, like I never existed. Pearl, I can explain. I don't need to hear it. She cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. I don't need your explanation. I don't need your reasons. I don't need anything from you. Harrison stood there, for the first time in 20 years, not knowing what to say. He was the Reaper, the man the entire underworld feared. But in front of this woman, he was only a man accused of abandoning her and the children they shared. Leave. Pearl pointed to the door. Before I call the police. Harrison knew she wasn't joking. And he also knew this wasn't the moment to force anything. Not in front of the kids. Not while her anger was still this hot. He pulled out his wallet, took out a black business card with silver lettering, and set it on the counter. "When you're ready to listen, call me. Anytime." Pearl didn't look at the card, didn't look at him. She only stood there with both hands clenched into fists at her sides. Harrison turned and walked out, each step heavy as if stones were tied to his feet. The Rolls-Royce was still waiting outside. Sterling opened the car door, but Harrison didn't get in right away. He stood on the sidewalk, staring through the bakery window. Pearl had turned away, her shoulders shaking. She was crying, and there was nothing he could do to comfort her. Not yet. Harrison slid into the car and watched the small bakery shrink in the rearview mirror. For the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss on the east coast of the United States didn't know what the next step was. That night, Harrison sat alone in the penthouse on the 50th floor of Blackwood Tower. The whiskey glass in his hand never seemed to empty. The lights of Manhattan flickered beyond the window, but he saw nothing except Pearl's face. The anger in her eyes, the pain of 8 years. The clock struck 11 at night. Harrison's phone vibrated, an unfamiliar number, from Brooklyn. He answered, and before he could say a word, a small voice came through. "Dad, Jasper." The boy's voice was a whisper, as if he was afraid someone might hear. "It's me, Jasper." Harrison sat up straighter. "What is it?" "Mom's been crying all night, Dad." Jasper's voice caught. "I can hear her crying in her room. Ruby can't sleep either. We're scared." Harrison's heart tightened. "Dad, can you come back? Please." The next morning, when the first light of sun brushed the front of the bakery, the black Rolls-Royce was already parked across the street. Harrison stepped out alone. Without Sterling, without bodyguards, just him and a determination to uncover the truth. The bell above the door chimed softly as he pushed it open and walked in. Pearl stood behind the counter, drying baking trays with steady hands. She looked up at him without surprise, as if she had known he would return, as if she had been waiting for this moment all night. "Where are the children?" Harrison asked, his voice lower than usual. "At school, like every other normal child." Pearl set the tray down and met his eyes. "Jasper called you last night. It wasn't a question. She knew." Harrison nodded without denying it. "The boy was worried about you." Pearl closed her eyes for a brief second and let out a quiet breath. The fury from the night before seemed to have ebbed, replaced by the deep exhaustion of a woman who had fought alone for too long. "Come to the back. I don't want to talk out here." She led him through the rear door into the small kitchen where the scent of butter and vanilla lingered in the air. Baking molds were stacked neatly on the shelves. A photograph of Ruby and Jasper was stuck to the refrigerator, the two children grinning wide, cream smeared across their faces. Harrison stared at the picture, and something inside his chest twisted painfully. 8 years. 8 years of moments like that he had never seen. Pearl leaned back against the counter, folding her arms across her chest. "Go on. What do you want to explain?" Harrison stood opposite her, keeping enough distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "I didn't abandon you, Pearl. I almost died." She didn't react. She simply stood there, waiting for him to continue. Her dark brown eyes revealed nothing. "The last night we saw each other, I told you I had to handle business," Harrison began, his voice even, almost like he was delivering a report. "It was the war with the Moreno family. They ambushed me on the way back. 3 bullets. One in my shoulder, one in my abdomen, one that nearly hit my heart." Pearl drew in a quiet breath, but she still said nothing. "I was in the hospital for 2 months. After that came 18 months of war. Moreno had allies everywhere. I couldn't contact anyone outside. It wasn't safe." Harrison paused and looked at her. "When it was over, I came back to find you. But you were gone. The apartment was empty. The bar said you had quit. No one knew where you went. It was as if you had vanished off the face of the earth." The silence stretched between them. Pearl laughed, but the sound was so bitter it almost passed for a sob. "Because I had to vanish." She walked to the small window and looked out into the narrow alley behind the shop. Her back was to Harrison, her slender shoulders trembling faintly. 2 weeks after you disappeared, someone came to the bar looking for me." Her voice dropped, as if she was recounting an old nightmare. 2 men, black suits. They knew my name, knew who I was to you, even knew the address of the apartment I was renting." Harrison stood perfectly still, every muscle in his body tightening. "They said if I remained connected to Harrison Blackwood, they would kill me." It wasn't an empty threat. They described exactly the route I walked to work every day. They knew where I bought coffee each morning. They knew everything. Pearl turned back to him, her eyes red but dry. She had cried enough. She had cried for 8 long years. I was afraid, Harrison. So afraid that at 3 a.m. I packed everything I could carry and disappeared. Changed my name, changed cities, changed everything. And then you found out you were pregnant, Harrison said, his voice rough. Pearl nodded. 2 months after I arrived in Brooklyn. Alone. No insurance, no family, no savings. She let out a hollow laugh. Do you know how dangerous it is to deliver twins? I nearly died on the table from hemorrhaging. The doctor said 10 more minutes, and it would have been too late. Harrison clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He imagined Pearl alone in a hospital room, dying without anyone beside her, while he was somewhere else, bleeding for a gang war. Who? He asked, his voice so cold the air in the kitchen seemed to freeze. Who threatened you? Pearl shook her head. I don't know. They didn't give names, didn't say who they were. Only that they knew about you. Knew who you were, knew what you did. Harrison turned away and drove his fist hard into the wall. Plaster cracked beneath the force of his blow. I'll find out, no matter how long it takes. It's been 8 years, Pearl said, her voice weary. I don't need you to find them. I don't need revenge. I just need you to stay away. Let me and the children live in peace. You think it's that simple? Harrison turned back to her, his gray eyes storming. You think I can walk away after learning I have children? After knowing what you went through? I've lived 8 years without you. I raised 2 children alone. I built this bakery from a pushcart on the sidewalk. Pearl stepped closer to him, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze without flinching. I don't need saving. I don't need you. Harrison looked at her, this small woman who had faced everything alone, stronger than any soldier he had ever known, and more fragile than she believed. It's too late, Pearl, he said, his voice low and firm. The children found me in Manhattan, in my building. Security cameras everywhere. It's only a matter of time before my people know. And if my people know, he let the meaning settle into the silence. Then my enemies will know too. Knox Valentine. The others, they're always searching for my weakness. And now they might find it. Pearl went pale, but she did not step back. Then what do you want? Harrison looked straight into her eyes, and his voice no longer belonged to a mafia boss. It belonged to a father. I want to protect you. You and the children. That's the only thing I want. And that's something you can't do alone. Not with men like Knox Valentine. Pearl stood in silence for a long time after Harrison finished speaking. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that she had lived safely for 8 years without anyone's protection. But deep down, she knew he was right. Her 2 children had taken the subway across the city on their own, walked into the building of one of the most dangerous men in America, and declared in front of everyone that he was their father. If Harrison had not seen them first, if it had been someone else, one of his enemies, the consequences would have been unthinkable. Let me protect you, Harrison said, his voice softening slightly. Not because you need me, because the children need to be safe. Pearl closed her eyes and drew in a long, steady breath. This was the hardest decision she had faced since the night she fled 8 years ago. Letting Harrison Blackwood step back into her life meant allowing his underworld to brush against her family, but turning him away meant leaving her children unprotected from dangers she could not even see. All right. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. But on my terms. Harrison nodded, waiting. You may see the children, but you don't stay overnight. You don't interfere with how I raise them. You don't bring anything connected to your work anywhere near this bakery. And if the children don't want to see you, you respect that. Agreed. Harrison answered without a second of hesitation. Pearl was faintly surprised by how easily he accepted. She had prepared herself for a tense negotiation, but he agreed as though those rules meant nothing compared to being allowed near his children. Anything else? He asked. Pearl shook her head, still wary. For now, that is enough. That afternoon, when the yellow school bus pulled up in front of the gate, Ruby and Jasper stepped off with their backpacks slung over their shoulders. Both of them froze when they saw what waited. Their mother stood there as she always did. But beside her was a tall man in a black suit, gray eyes fixed on them. Dad, Ruby shouted first, dropping her backpack to the ground and racing toward Harrison like a small bullet. Dad, you really came back. She threw herself at his legs, holding on as if he might disappear the moment she let go. Harrison stood stiff for a second, unsure what to do. For 20 years he had been accustomed to giving orders, to controlling every situation. Nothing had prepared him for a 7-year-old girl clutching his legs and calling him Dad. Slowly, he knelt down so Ruby could wrap her arms around his neck instead. Jasper approached more slowly, his steps cautious, his gray eyes observing everything. He stopped a few paces away and looked at his mother for confirmation. Pearl gave a small nod. "Your father will be around for a while." Jasper turned back to Harrison, still keeping his distance. He did not run into his arms like his sister. Instead, he asked bluntly, "Do you kill people?" Pearl nearly scolded him for the question, but Harrison lifted a hand to stop her. He knelt so that he was eye level with Jasper, one arm still holding Ruby, who clung to his neck. "There are people who want to hurt my family," he said, looking straight into his son's eyes. "And I don't let that happen, at any cost." Jasper fell silent, thinking, his gray eyes identical to Harrison's blinking thoughtfully. The boy was weighing, assessing, judging, the same way Harrison did when facing a new associate. At last, Jasper nodded. "All right, I accept that," as if he had just signed a business contract rather than spoken to his father. Harrison almost laughed. The boy was unmistakably his. Ruby paid no attention to the serious exchange. She pulled her stuffed bear Pepper from her backpack and shoved it into Harrison's hands. "Daddy, hold Pepper for me. Pepper likes you." Harrison looked down at the old bear, its stuffing flattened, one eye missing, the left ear clumsily stitched. He held it with both hands, awkward as though it were a ticking bomb. The Reaper, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, standing at the gate of an elementary school, in a $10,000 suit, holding a worn stuffed bear. If Sterling could see this, he would never believe his eyes. "You'll stay for dinner, right?" Ruby looked up at him, her wide eyes full of hope. Harrison glanced at Pearl. She stood with her arms folded, lips pressed tight. Then she let out a reluctant sigh and gave a small nod. "One dinner. And you wash the dishes." Harrison nodded immediately. "Done." Ruby cheered and grabbed Harrison's hand, tugging him along. Jasper picked up his sister's backpack and walked beside his mother, occasionally glancing at the unfamiliar man who was allowing himself to be led like a large, obedient dog. Dinner that night was simple: pasta with tomato sauce and meatballs, toasted bread, salad. There was no expensive wine, no century-old oak dining table, no servants waiting behind chairs. Just 4 people seated around a small table in the cramped kitchen behind the bakery. Ruby talked without pause about school, about her teacher, about the class hamster named Mr. Whiskers. Jasper was quieter, but now and then he offered a sharp comment that made Harrison look at him with quiet admiration. Pearl watched everything, still cautious, but her shoulders were less rigid than they had been that morning. Harrison sat there with a fork in his hand, taking in the scene before him. He could not remember the last time he had shared a family dinner. Perhaps never. His father died when he was 15, his mother before that. Since then, his meals had been alone in a cold penthouse or in lavish restaurants surrounded by people he did not trust. But here, in this small kitchen filled with the scent of tomato sauce and the sound of Ruby's laughter echoing off the walls, Harrison felt something he had long forgotten. The feeling of belonging somewhere. 200 miles west of Manhattan, in a hilltop mansion overlooking a quiet valley in Pennsylvania, Knox Valentine sat inside a study paneled in dark oak. Candlelight from an antique chandelier cast shifting shadows across his angular face, accentuating the scar that ran from his temple down to his left cheek. It was a gift from Harrison Blackwood 10 years earlier, back when Knox had been a small-time drug trafficker daring to encroach on East Coast territory. He had not forgotten. He had never forgotten. The door opened, and a man stepped in with a tablet in his hand. Marco, Knox's most trusted lieutenant, the man who managed an intelligence network that stretched across the East Coast. "There is new information about Blackwood." Marco set the tablet on the desk. "It is very interesting." Knox lifted his glass of whiskey to his lips, unhurried. "Go on." "Harrison Blackwood has 2 children. Twins, 7 years old, a boy and a girl." Knox paused mid-motion, the glass suspended just before his mouth. Then he lowered it slowly, a smile spreading across his lips. The smile of a serpent that had just discovered a nest of fledglings. "Say that again." 2 children, sir. They showed up at Blackwood Tower yesterday and declared themselves his in front of Sterling Cross and the entire security camera system." Knox leaned back in his chair, a low laugh rumbling through the room. "The Reaper has children. The Reaper, the man with no weakness, the man who killed his own father to seize power, the man who never loved anyone long enough to build a family, has children. He shook his head, still laughing softly. How deliciously ironic. The mother is named Pearl Ashford. Marco swiped the screen and brought up a file. She owns a small bakery in Brooklyn, Sweet Pearl Bakery. It appears she kept the children hidden from Blackwood for 7 years. Knox studied the file, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Follow them, all 3. I want to know where the children go to school, which routes they take, how much protection they have. I want to know what time this woman wakes up, where she buys her coffee, who she speaks to. Understood. Marco nodded. And Blackwood. Not yet. Knox rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the dark sky. Let him enjoy being a father first. Let him love those children. Let him have something to lose. His eyes turned cold as stone. Then we will take it away. Meanwhile, at Blackwood Tower, Sterling Cross entered Harrison's office with a rare expression of concern. We have a problem, sir. Harrison looked up from the stack of documents on his desk. Speak. My men spotted unfamiliar faces around the bakery. A black car parked at the end of the street for 3 hours this morning. 2 men taking turns inside, photographing. Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the glittering lights of Manhattan. License plate. Fake. We are tracing the vehicle. Harrison remained silent for a long moment. Then he turned back. Increased security around the bakery. 24 hours a day. Discreetly. Pearl must not know. Sterling nodded, though his expression remained tight. If Knox knows about the children, he will know. Harrison cut in, his voice cold as steel. The question is not whether he knows. The question is what he will do, and we will be ready. Do you want to strike first? Not yet. Harrison shook his head. There is not enough cause to ignite a war. But if he touches my family, he did not need to finish. Sterling understood. The next morning at Sweet Pearl Bakery, everything unfolded as usual. Pearl opened the doors at 6 in the morning and prepared the first batches of pastries for the day. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon drifted down the quiet street. Regular customers stopped by one after another. Among them was a brown-haired woman in her early 30s who always wore a gray coat and ordered an almond croissant with black coffee. She had come every morning for the past 2 weeks, always sitting at the table by the window, always smiling warmly at Pearl and the children. Ruby is so adorable, she said one morning as Ruby ran past with an apron dusted in flour. She looks just like you. Pearl smiled, unsuspecting. Thank you. Ruby is mischievous, but she is sweet. The woman nodded and smiled, and when Pearl turned away, she quietly lifted her phone and snapped a photograph of Ruby laughing with Jasper through the window glass. That night, the photograph lay on Knox Valentine's desk. He picked it up and studied the 2 children in the image, Ruby with her radiant smile and black hair tied back with a red ribbon, Jasper with sharp gray eyes staring straight into the camera as if he sensed someone watching. Eyes identical to Harrison Blackwood's. The little girl is charming, Knox murmured, his finger lightly tracing Ruby's face in the picture, and the boy is his father's mirror image. He set the photograph down and turned to Marco, who stood waiting for orders. We will send our regards to the Reaper soon. Very soon. 2 weeks passed like a strange dream Harrison had never imagined would belong to him. Each day, after finishing his work at Blackwood Tower, he drove to Brooklyn, not in the Rolls-Royce with a private driver anymore, but in a black sport utility vehicle that drew far less attention. Sterling still followed at a careful distance, still watched every corner of every street, but Harrison wanted his moments with the children to feel as normal as possible. Normal, a word he had never once expected to use to describe his life. On the 7th day of the 2nd week, Ruby announced that she wanted to go to the zoo. You have never been to the zoo, have you, Daddy? She asked, her wide eyes fixed on him as if he had just confessed he had never tasted ice cream. Harrison had to admit the truth. He had never been to a zoo. When he was a boy, his family had not had money for such luxuries. As a man, he had been too busy killing and building an empire. The Bronx Zoo had never made his list of priorities, so that Saturday morning, the Reaper stood at the entrance to the zoo with 2 7-year-olds, having absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do. Ruby did not wait for him to figure it out. She grabbed his hand and pulled him forward like a small whirlwind. Let us see the gorillas first, Daddy. I want to see the gorillas. Jasper walked beside them, holding the zoo map and reading the fine print beneath each exhibit. Western lowland gorillas are critically endangered, Dad. There are only about 100,000 left in the wild. Deforestation and poaching are the main causes. Harrison looked at his son, surprised. Where did you read that? Books. Jasper shrugged as though it were obvious. I like reading about animals, about science, about everything. They spent the entire morning wandering through the zoo. Ruby wanted to stop at every enclosure, waving to each animal as if greeting old friends. Jasper played the role of guide, explaining each species with the precision of a young scientist, and Harrison, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, followed the two children like a large, obedient bear, holding 2 bottles of water, a bag of popcorn, the stuffed bear pepper, and a giraffe-shaped balloon Ruby had insisted on buying. Sterling stood 50 yards away behind a hot dog cart, doing his best not to laugh. The following week was Central Park. Harrison bought the children ice cream from a street cart, strawberry for Ruby, chocolate for Jasper. He did not order any for himself, but when Ruby insisted that he try a bite of hers, he found he could not refuse. They sat on a stone bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching joggers pass, other children playing across the grass, a normal family among hundreds of other normal families. No one knew that the man sitting there eating ice cream with 2 children was the one the underworld feared. The week after that was the Museum of Natural History. Jasper was in his element. He pulled Harrison from the dinosaur hall to the planetarium, his eyes bright with wonder at every exhibit. He read each placard aloud and asked questions Harrison could not always answer. Dad, if a large enough asteroid hit the Earth, it could cause a mass extinction like the dinosaurs, Jasper said, standing before a model of the solar system. But NASA is developing technology to redirect asteroids. I think I want to work on that when I grow up. Harrison looked at his son and felt a fierce surge of pride. The boy was brilliant. Not the cunning intelligence of the underworld, but the kind that could change the world. You can do anything you want, Harrison said. I will make sure of it. On the drive home, after Ruby had fallen asleep in the back seat, Jasper spoke unexpectedly. Dad, yes, at school, some kids tease me. He stared out the window, his voice as calm as if he were commenting on the weather. They say I don't have a father. They say Mom is a single mother. They call me a kid without a dad. Harrison tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Anger flared like fire, but he forced it down. Who? What are their names? It is fine, Dad. Jasper turned to him, gray eyes steady in a way that felt far too old for a child his age. I handled it. I told them my father is very busy doing important work. Then I punched one in the face. They stopped. Harrison did not know whether to feel proud or alarmed. Perhaps both. You are strong, he said, meeting his son's gaze in the rearview mirror. But remember, from now on you have your father behind you. You don't have to face everything alone anymore. Jasper nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a rare, small smile. That afternoon, after dinner, Ruby handed Harrison a sheet of paper folded into quarters. I drew this for you. Harrison unfolded it carefully. It was a crayon drawing, 4 figures standing side by side, holding hands. A tall man dressed in black, a woman with long brown hair, a boy, a girl holding a stuffed bear. Above them was a bright, smiling sun and uneven letters spelling out, my family. Harrison stared at the drawing for a long time. His chest tightened. He folded the paper with deliberate care, each crease precise as if he were handling the most important document of his life. Then he slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, over his heart. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I will keep it forever. Pearl stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the scene unfold. Ruby was climbing onto Harrison's back, demanding a piggyback ride. Jasper sat nearby with a book in his hands, though every so often he glanced at his father with a warmth he tried to conceal. And Harrison, the Reaper, the most feared Mafia boss, was smiling. Not the cold smile he wore before enemies, not the practiced smile of negotiation, but the smile of a father who was happy with his children. Pearl's heart wavered. She reminded herself who he was, the world he came from, the danger that followed him like a shadow. Yet as Ruby's laughter rang out from his back, as Jasper's shoulders finally relaxed for the first time, Pearl could not deny a simple truth. Her children needed their father, and perhaps, somewhere deep within her own guarded heart, she needed him too. 1 week after the museum trip, Ruby's elementary school announced a picnic at Prospect Park. Ruby was excited all week, talking endlessly about the games, about eating pizza outdoors, about her teacher promising the class a game of tag. That morning, Harrison arrived at the bakery earlier than usual. He wanted to take Ruby to school himself, to watch her board the bus before he left. But his phone rang. Sterling. Boss, the meeting with the Southern Allies has been moved up to today. They are already on their way. It can't be postponed. Harrison looked at Ruby running around the bakery with her unicorn backpack bouncing against her shoulders, excitement radiating from her small body. He wanted to stay, wanted to follow her to the park, wanted to make certain everything was safe. What about the security team? He asked, tension tightening his voice. 4 men assigned to the bus, 2 more inside the park posing as visitors. Everything is under control, sir. I guarantee it. Harrison did not like this. 20 years of surviving in the underworld roared inside his mind that something was wrong. But the meeting mattered. The Southern Allies controlled the primary transport routes. If he failed to appear, they would take it as disrespect. And in his world, disrespect could ignite a war. Fine, he said reluctantly. I want updates every 30 minutes. Any sign of irregularity? You call me immediately. Understood, sir. Harrison ended the call and knelt to hug Ruby. Daddy has to work today. I can't come with you, but have fun. Listen to your teacher. Ruby wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his cheek. I know, Daddy. Don't worry. I will tell you everything when I get back. He watched her climb onto the bus and wave at him through the window. And somewhere deep inside, a shadow stirred. But he pushed it aside and drove back to Manhattan. The picnic went smoothly throughout the morning. Security reported at regular intervals. The children played, ate lunch, joined in group games. Ruby laughed with her friends, running freely across the grass. Everything was perfect. Until 2 in the afternoon. A delivery truck lost control on the road beside the park and slammed into the iron fence with a deafening crash. Metal twisted. Wood splintered. Chaos erupted. Children screamed. Parents panicked. Teachers tried to gather students while smoke poured from the truck's engine. Harrison's security detail rushed toward the crash by instinct, moving to contain the situation and ensure no one was hurt. In that single moment of confusion, no one noticed the black sport utility vehicle parked across the park. No one noticed the familiar brown-haired woman, the customer who often bought almond croissants, approach Ruby, who stood briefly alone away from the crowd. Ruby, do you remember me? I buy pastries at your mother's bakery. Ruby looked up and recognized the familiar face. Yes, I remember you. Your father asked me to pick you up. He is waiting just over there. Ruby hesitated. Daddy had always said never go with strangers. But this woman was not a stranger. She came to the bakery. She knew Daddy. Really? She asked softly. Really? Your father is in a hurry. Let me take you to him. And before Ruby could think any further, she was gently guided toward the waiting vehicle, its engine already running. By the time the security team returned, Ruby was gone. 20 minutes later, Pearl's phone rang. I am so sorry, Mrs. Ashford, her daughter's teacher said, her voice shaking. Ruby. We can't find Ruby. She disappeared after the accident. We have searched the entire park. Pearl heard nothing after that. A ringing filled her ears. The world tilted. Her daughter, her little girl, gone. With trembling hands, she called Harrison, barely able to press the numbers correctly. At Blackwood Tower, Harrison sat in a meeting with 5 of the most powerful bosses in the Southeast when his phone vibrated. Normally, he would ignore it. No one was allowed to interrupt an important meeting, but it was Pearl's number. He answered. Harrison. Pearl's voice shattered like glass. Ruby. She is missing. Harrison. They can't find her. Our daughter is gone. The world stopped turning. All sound vanished. The 5 men across from him ceased to exist. There was only Pearl's desperate voice echoing in his mind. Ruby. His daughter. The little girl who laughed so easily, who clung to his legs, who placed Pepper the stuffed bear in his hands as if entrusting him with something sacred. Gone. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then the Reaper awakened. Not Harrison Blackwood, the man learning how to be a father, but the Reaper, who had built an empire on the blood and tears of his enemies. Harrison rose to his feet, cutting off the meeting without apology. The 5 bosses stared at him, startled and offended. but one look at his eyes silenced them. Sterling. Harrison's voice was ice, steady and merciless. Mobilize everyone. Every contact. Every eye on the street. Find my daughter. Tear this city apart if you have to. Sterling was already at the door, phone in hand. It is in motion, sir. Harrison moved toward the exit, then paused and turned back to the 5 men seated at the table. If any of you have information about my daughter, speak now. If anyone withholds information. He did not finish the sentence. His steel-gray eyes finished it for him. You will cease to exist. No one dared to breathe. Harrison's phone rang while he was on his way to Brooklyn. An unknown number. He answered, already knowing exactly who it was. Blackwood. Knox Valentine's voice came through, thick with satisfaction. It has been a long time. 10 years, isn't it? Since the last time you left me this little gift on my face. Harrison tightened his grip on the phone. Where is my daughter? The girl is beautiful. Knox gave a low chuckle. She has her father's eyes, doesn't she? The same gray. Brave, too. She is not crying. Not yet. Rage erupted inside Harrison like a volcano, but he forced it down. Losing control now meant losing everything. What do you want? Simple. Knox drew out the word, savoring it. Withdraw from the East Coast. Completely. Every territory, every route, everything you have built over the last 20 years. In exchange for the girl. Silence stretched between them. Harrison stared out the car window as Manhattan streamed past like a river of light. His empire. Everything he had bled for. Fine, he said, without hesitation. Knox fell quiet for a second, clearly not expecting such a swift answer. You are serious. I don't gamble with my child's life. Name the location. I will come alone. The old warehouse in Red Hook. Midnight. You know the place. Knox laughed softly. No tricks, Blackwood. She is very sweet. I would hate to damage her. The call ended. Harrison turned to Sterling in the driver's seat. Find their exact position. I need to know where my daughter is before midnight. We are working on it, sir. The network is fully activated. Meanwhile, in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, Ruby sat curled in a dark corner. The room was cold, the only light slipping through a crack in a rusted metal door. She held Pepper tight against her chest, her small hands trembling. She was afraid. More afraid than she had ever been. But deep inside, there was one thing she believed without question. Daddy would come, he promised. He said he would always protect her. Ruby closed her eyes and remembered Harrison's voice. Deep, steady, as if nothing in the world could defeat him. The door creaked open. A large man stepped inside, a flashlight beam sweeping across Ruby's small face. Still not crying, he muttered with a smirk. Brave little thing. Your father must be proud. Ruby lifted her chin, gray eyes locking onto his without flinching. My daddy is coming. My daddy is the Reaper. The man laughed, but the sound faltered when he saw her eyes. There was no fear in them, only absolute certainty. He turned away and shut the door, his footsteps slightly quicker than before. In the darkness, Ruby hugged Pepper tighter. Daddy will come, she whispered to the bear. Daddy promised. 11 at night. Harrison received a message from Sterling. Coordinates. A different warehouse, 4 miles north of the location Knox had given, where Ruby was truly being held. How many? Harrison asked, eyes fixed on the screen. 8. Armed, but not professionals. Knox's main men are at the false location, waiting for you. Harrison nodded once. Assemble the team. We move now. 11:45. 2 black sport utility vehicles stopped 200 meters from the warehouse. 12 men stepped out, moving through the darkness like shadows. Harrison led them. No body armor, no hesitation. Only cold fury and the iron resolve of a father. The assault lasted less than 5 minutes. Swift, precise, final. Harrison's men outmatched them in both number and skill. Knox's 8 subordinates were subdued before they could raise an alarm. Not a single shot was fired. Harrison did not want Ruby to hear gunfire. He moved through the dark rooms, his steps quick but steady, and then he found her. Ruby sat in the corner, her small face illuminated as a beam of light crossed the room. Her gray eyes widened, then shone when she saw the familiar silhouette in the doorway. Daddy. Harrison dropped to his knees and gathered his daughter into his arms. He held her so tightly, as if she might vanish if he loosened his grip. "Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you?" Ruby burst into tears then, the dam finally breaking, but she shook her head. "I am okay. I knew you would come. I told them you would come." Harrison held her closer, burying his face in her dark hair. And for the first time in 20 years, something wet traced down his cheek. Tears. The Reaper was crying. "I am here now," he whispered, his voice trembling in a way he had not believed himself capable of. "I am sorry. I am so sorry I was not there. No one will ever hurt you again. I promise. I promise." Ruby wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. "I love you, Daddy." 3 simple words. But to Harrison, they were words he never believed he deserved to hear. "I love you too," he answered thickly. "More than anything in this world." Harrison carried Ruby out of the warehouse, Pepper wedged between them as she clung to him. Outside, Sterling waited. Beside him, Knox Valentine knelt on the ground in handcuffs, his face bruised but still twisted in defiance. "You win this time, Blackwood," Knox spat. "But you will not kill me. You need me to keep peace with the West." Harrison stopped and looked down at the man who had dared touch his daughter. His gray eyes were colder than any winter night. "I have established a new rule. I don't touch women and children, and because you broke it, you will face a fate worse than death." He crouched down until his face was inches from Knox's. "I will not kill you. I will let the federal authorities handle you. Smuggling, money laundering, kidnapping a child. You will rot in prison until the day you die." He rose and looked at Knox with the calm certainty of a man who had already won. "You will pay with everything you have. Every dollar, every soldier, every scrap of corrupt power you built. All of it will turn to ash." Knox opened his mouth to speak, but Harrison had already turned away, carrying Ruby toward the vehicle. He did not need to hear another word. He had his daughter. That was all that mattered. The sport utility vehicle pulled to a stop in front of the bakery at 2 a.m. The lights inside were still on. Pearl had been standing behind the glass door for hours, her eyes fixed on the empty street. When the car door opened and Harrison stepped out with Ruby in his arms, Pearl rushed forward like a gust of wind. She could not speak. She simply gathered her daughter into her arms, tears pouring down her face without restraint. Her whole body trembled, sobs breaking in her throat without sound. Ruby clung to her mother and gently patted her back like a child older than her years. "I am okay, Mom. I am okay. Daddy came to save me." The bakery door opened again. Jasper ran out, his face flushed, his eyes swollen from hours of crying. He was always the quiet one, always in control of his emotions. But now everything had shattered. Ruby. He threw his arms around his sister, holding her tight as if he would never let go again. "Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? Were you scared?" Ruby shook her head, a small smile trembling on her lips, though her eyes were still red. "I am fine. Daddy came. Daddy protected me." Jasper lifted his gaze to Harrison, gray eyes identical to his father's, filled with tears. For the first time, he did not try to hide what he felt. "Thank you, Dad." 2 simple words. But to Harrison, they were everything. He sank to his knees and pulled both children into his arms, Ruby on his left, Jasper on his right, 2 small bodies wrapped around his neck. For the first time in his life, Harrison understood what a family embrace truly meant. Pearl stood there, watching the 3 of them holding one another in the quiet street. Tears still streamed down her face, but they were no longer only tears of fear or relief. There was something else now. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Harrison's shoulder. He looked up at her, and Pearl did something she never thought she would do. She took his hand and squeezed it tightly without a word. The gesture said more than any gratitude she could have spoken. Harrison closed his fingers around hers, lacing them together as though her hand were the only lifeline in a vast ocean. They brought the children inside, bathed them, changed their clothes. Ruby was exhausted and fell asleep the moment her head touched the pillow. Jasper lay beside her, one hand resting over Ruby's as if afraid she might disappear again. Harrison stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. His heart still pounded. The terror had not fully faded. He had almost lost her. Almost. Pearl stood beside him, their shoulders touching. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing her back." Harrison shook his head. "Don't thank me. This is my fault. They became targets because of me." They went downstairs and sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The tea Pearl had made steamed between them, untouched. Harrison met her eyes, and he knew this was the moment to speak the decision that had formed in his mind the instant he held Ruby in that dark warehouse. "I am leaving the underworld." Pearl looked up sharply. "What?" "Gradually, with a plan. I will transition everything into legitimate business. Blackwood Holdings will be nothing but real estate and licensed casinos. Nothing else." Pearl shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Your empire, everything you built. It is not worth it," Harrison interrupted firmly. "Nothing is worth it if I lose the children, if I lose you." Pearl was quiet for a long time. Then she asked softly, "What about Knox?" "Federal authorities," Harrison replied. "I handed him over along with every piece of evidence. Smuggling, money laundering, kidnapping. He will rot in prison." Pearl stared at him, surprised. She knew his world. She knew how men like him dealt with enemies. "You did not." "No." Harrison shook his head. "I did not kill him." The next morning, Sterling came to the bakery with a report. When Pearl took the children upstairs, Sterling lowered his voice. "Sir, why not kill him? After what he did to Ruby, no one would blame you if he disappeared." Harrison looked toward the staircase where Ruby's laughter had just echoed after Jasper said something amusing. "Because one day my daughter will ask what I did to the man who kidnapped her." He turned back to Sterling. "And I want an answer I am not ashamed of. I want to tell her her father did the right thing, that he let the law handle it, that he is not a murderer." Sterling said nothing, but something in his expression shifted. A new respect, for a man trying to become better than he had been. That evening, Pearl came downstairs and found Harrison still sitting at the table, looking at the drawing Ruby had made. 4 figures holding hands. Family. She sat beside him without speaking, and took his hand again as she had the night before. This time, she held it more tightly, not only out of gratitude, but because of something deeper, something she had tried to deny for 8 long years. Harrison looked at her, his gray eyes gentler than she had ever seen them. "Pearl, don't say anything," she whispered. "Just sit here, with me." And so they sat there, hand in hand, in the small kitchen scented faintly with vanilla. Outside, the city roared on. The world kept turning, but in that quiet moment, there were only 2 people, and a future slowly taking shape before them. 3 months passed like a gentle dream none of them had ever dared to believe could be real. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm, a rhythm that included Harrison. He bought the shop next door to the bakery and hired a construction crew to expand Sweet Pearl Bakery to twice its original size. There was more seating for customers, a larger kitchen, new glass display cases gleaming beneath warm lights. But on every document, Pearl Ashford remained the sole owner. Harrison insisted on that. This was the empire she had built with her own 2 hands, not his. Jasper and Ruby transferred to a better school in a safer neighborhood. The school had discreet security the children did not notice, surveillance cameras other parents never thought twice about, and men from Sterling's team rotating quiet watch from a distance. Everything was arranged carefully, thoughtfully, without revealing that these 2 children belonged to one of the most powerful men on the east coast of the United States. Harrison showed up every day. In the mornings, he drove the children to school. In the afternoons, he picked them up. In the evenings, he ate dinner with his family in the small kitchen behind the bakery. Sterling often joked that the boss now spent more time in Brooklyn than at Blackwood Tower. Harrison never argued. One Saturday afternoon, Ruby decided she would teach her father how to bake. "Daddy has to learn," she declared, hands on her hips, chin lifted with a seriousness so exaggerated it was almost comical. "You are a member of the bakery. You can't not know how to bake." Harrison, the man who had once commanded the entire underworld to bow, stood in the kitchen wearing a pink apron, printed with cupcakes, listening as his daughter explained how to beat eggs into flour, as if she were revealing a state secret. The first batch burned black. Harrison forgot to set the timer. The second batch was raw in the center because he opened the oven too many times to check. The third batch smoked so heavily that the fire alarm screamed through the bakery, forcing Pearl to rush in, smother the small flare, and throw open every window. Ruby laughed so hard she collapsed onto the kitchen floor, unable to catch her breath. Jasper stood in the corner with his phone raised, recording the entire disaster with a rare, mischievous smile. "Hey, Dad," he said in a calm voice that barely concealed the gleam in his eyes. "If you don't want me to send this video to Uncle Sterling, You might consider buying me the new astrophysics series I have been wanting." Harrison stared at his son, uncertain whether he should feel impressed or concerned. When had the boy learned blackmail? "Fine," he said at last, deciding impressed was the better emotion. "Which series do you want?" Jasper's smile widened in quiet triumph. One evening after dinner, the family sat together in the small living room watching a movie. Ruby lay with her head resting on Harrison's thigh. Jasper sat beside his mother, legs tucked beneath him on the sofa, reading instead of watching. In the middle of the film, Ruby suddenly sat up and looked at Harrison with wide, serious eyes. "Daddy, why do you and Mom not live together?" Harrison's heart clenched. She wanted him gone. She felt crowded by his presence. He had overstepped the boundaries Pearl had set from the beginning. He prepared to answer, prepared to say he would come less often, that he understood, "Why do you not just move in with us?" Ruby continued, entirely unaware that she had just given him a near heart attack. "You keep coming and going. It is tiring. Just stay." Jasper did not lift his eyes from his book, but he added, "You sleep on the sofa all the time. Your back must hurt. I see you rub it every morning. You should sleep in Mom's room. Her bed is big." Harrison flushed. For the first time in his life, the Reaper, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, blushed like a teenager caught staring at someone he liked. Pearl choked on her water. "Jasper." "What, Mom?" He finally looked up, his expression perfectly innocent. "Am I wrong? Is your bed not big?" Pearl had no answer. Neither did Harrison. The two adults sat there red-faced while two 7-year-olds examined them with open curiosity. In the days that followed, Pearl began to notice a conspiracy unfolding. Ruby constantly forgot something at home and insisted Daddy come back for it. Jasper frequently had nightmares in the middle of the night, requiring both parents to comfort him. The children even took turns feeling unwell, so that both adults would remain by the bedside together. Pearl discovered the scheme when she overheard Ruby whispering to Jasper in their room, "What is the plan tonight? I will pretend I am scared of ghosts. You tell Dad he should stay because I am frightened. Mom will not send him away if I am scared." "That is brilliant. You are so smart." Pearl stood outside their door, pressing a hand over her mouth to keep from laughing aloud. She was not angry. She could not be. Her heart only warmed at the realization of how desperately her children wanted a whole family. That night, after the children were asleep, Pearl invited Harrison up to the rooftop. It was where she went on sleepless nights, on nights when memories rose and unfinished dreams lingered. They sat side by side on the old roof tiles, legs dangling over the edge. The Brooklyn sky was clear. The full moon glowed bright, and a soft breeze carried the faint scent of vanilla from the bakery below. Harrison looked at the sky, then at Pearl. She was beautiful in the moonlight, brown hair stirring in the wind, eyes reflecting starlight, a face finally at peace, as though burdens had been lifted. 8 years ago, he began, his voice low and slow, "you were the only thing that made me feel human. In the middle of blood and violence, you were the only light." Pearl kept her gaze on the sky, but she listened. "I am afraid of being abandoned," she said softly. "My parents left me at an orphanage when I was 3. I grew up not knowing what a family felt like. I always believed I was not worth anyone staying for." Harrison took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "You are the first person I ever wanted to stay for. You and the children. You are my home." Pearl finally turned to look at him. Her brown eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "I want to be with you," Harrison said, his voice steadier than any vow he had ever spoken. "Not only for the children, for you, because I love you." Pearl was silent for a long time. Then, without a single word, she rested her head against his shoulder. Under the Brooklyn moon, in a city that never truly slept, that was her answer. Harrison wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in his life, he felt that he had come home. 1 month after that night on the rooftop, Harrison and Pearl officially began dating. Not the extravagant kind of courtship he could have arranged with a private jet to Paris or a yacht in the Caribbean. Instead, they took slow walks through the park, shared dinners in small Brooklyn restaurants, and spent quiet afternoons talking in the bakery after the children had gone to sleep. Simple, ordinary, and to Harrison, these were the greatest luxuries he had ever known. Life felt so peaceful that he almost forgot his old world still existed, until one afternoon when Sterling walked into the bakery with a tension in his face. Harrison knew too well. Trouble. Boss, we need to speak privately. Harrison glanced at Pearl serving customers, at Ruby and Jasper doing homework in the corner. He nodded and stepped outside with Sterling. What is it? Knox's former allies in the West, the Caruso family. They are not pleased that we handed Knox over to federal authorities. Sterling spoke quickly, his voice low. They want revenge. They are threatening to strike Blackwood Holdings, the casinos, the legitimate transport routes. Everything. Harrison said nothing, his jaw tightening. They want you to handle it personally, Sterling continued. Like the old days. They will not listen to anyone else. They only fear the Reaper, like the old days. The words landed heavy as lead. Harrison looked through the bakery window. Ruby was laughing at something Jasper had said. Pearl was handing a customer a croissant, warmth in her smile. His family, the life he was building. Boss. Sterling pressed gently. Harrison turned back to the man who had stood at his side for 15 years through wars and storms. I will think about it, he said, then returned inside. That evening, Pearl sensed something was wrong. Harrison sat at the dinner table but barely touched his food. His gray eyes were distant, as though his mind had traveled somewhere far away. What is it? She asked, once the children had gone upstairs. Harrison looked at her and, for the first time, did not hide anything. He told her about the Caruso family, about the threats to Blackwood Holdings, about Sterling's request that he return to handle things the old way. Pearl listened without expression. When he finished, she asked softly, Do you have to go? Harrison looked into her brown eyes, the eyes that had become his anchor. Then he glanced toward the living room where Ruby and Jasper were playing chess on the floor. Ruby was losing badly but still laughing. Jasper was patiently explaining why her last move had been wrong. For 20 years, when faced with something like this, Harrison would have risen and gone without hesitation. He would have stepped back into the shadows and resolved it with power and fear. He would have been the Reaper. But now he had what he had never possessed before. A reason to stay. No, he said firmly. Sterling can handle it. I am staying here. Pearl did not speak, but her eyes brightened. Harrison took out his phone and called Sterling. Sterling, listen carefully. I will not be coming. You will handle Caruso. Silence on the other end. Then Sterling's voice, edged with surprise. Boss, are you certain? This is serious. I trust you, Harrison replied. For 15 years you have stood beside me. You know how to deal with this. Do what must be done, but avoid bloodshed if possible. I want Blackwood Holdings to continue on its new path. The silence stretched. Then Sterling answered, his voice slightly unsteady. Understood, sir. I will take care of it. I know you will. Harrison ended the call and looked at Pearl. For the first time in 20 years, he said quietly, I let someone else handle something important. Pearl placed her hand over his. It is the right choice. That night, Harrison stayed at the bakery as he had been doing lately, but this time, when Ruby asked for a bedtime story, he was the one who sat beside her bed. He opened the book she chose, a fairy tale about a princess and a prince, and read in a low, steady voice, while Ruby curled against her pillow, her eyelids slowly growing heavy. Jasper lay in the other bed, pretending to read but truly listening to his father's voice. Harrison finished the final page where the prince and princess lived happily ever after. Ruby was already asleep, her breathing soft and even. Jasper closed his book, eyes shut. Harrison stood and pulled the blankets gently over each child. When he turned, Pearl was standing in the doorway. Tears glistened on her cheeks. Harrison stepped toward her and brushed them away with his thumb. Why are you crying? Pearl looked at him, her eyes shining in the dim hallway light. Because you are here, she whispered. You are truly here. You chose to stay. Harrison drew her into his arms, resting his chin against the top of her head. I will always be here, he murmured. I promise. 2 more months passed, and Harrison Blackwood officially became the man dating Pearl Ashford. No more ambiguity. No more quiet uncertainty. All of Brooklyn seemed to know that the owner of Sweet Pearl Bakery had a tall, enigmatic man who arrived each day to pick her up along with the children. One Friday evening, Harrison took Pearl to a small restaurant on a corner just a few blocks from the bakery, not a glittering establishment at the top of a skyscraper with a French menu he could recite without looking. Instead, it was a warm family place, with worn wooden chairs, red and white checkered tablecloths, and the comforting scent of toasted bread drifting from the kitchen. Pearl had chosen it. Harrison agreed without hesitation. Yet when he looked down at the menu, he froze. Cheeseburger, $15. Spaghetti with meat sauce, $12. Caesar salad, $9. No Wagyu steak priced at $500. No French wine costing $1,000 a bottle. Nothing familiar. Pearl watched the bewilderment on his face and laughed softly. You look like a fish out of water. Harrison glanced up, the corner of his mouth lifting. I am learning. For you. Then learn, she teased gently, pointing to an item on the page. Start with the cheeseburger. It is good. I promise. Harrison ordered the cheeseburger, and he had to admit, it was one of the finest meals of his life. Not because of the food, because of the woman sitting across from him. A week later, Pearl took Harrison to meet Maggie, the woman who had taken her in when she was a child, abandoned in an orphanage. 70 years old, living in a modest third-floor apartment in an aging Brooklyn building. White hair, slight frame, but eyes sharp and bright as a blade. When Harrison stepped inside, Maggie looked him up and down. No fear, no hesitation, only the measured scrutiny of someone who had lived long enough to be unimpressed by appearances. So you are the father of those two little ones? She asked plainly. Yes, ma'am, Harrison replied, standing straight as if delivering a formal report. I hear you are a dangerous man. Yes, ma'am. Maggie stepped closer, tilting her head to look up at him, though she reached only to his chest. Do you make my Pearl cry? Harrison was silent for a heartbeat before answering honestly. I will do everything in my power not to. Maggie studied him for a long moment, her aged eyes searching as though she could see every secret he carried. Then she nodded once. All right, you passed the first round. There are many more to come. Pearl stood behind them, covering her mouth to hide her laughter. It was the first time she had seen Harrison Blackwood, the Reaper, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, interrogated by a 70-year-old woman with nothing to defend himself except patience. 6 months after the day they met again in that elevator, Harrison sat alone in the penthouse at Blackwood Tower. On the table before him rested a small black velvet box. He opened it. Inside lay a ring, not a massive diamond he could easily afford. Instead, a single white pearl, luminous and pure, set upon a simple band of white gold. Pearl, her name, and now, the quiet destiny of his life. Harrison spent an entire week planning the most important moment of his life. Not a plan to seize territory, not a strategy to confront an enemy, but a plan to propose to Pearl Ashford. And he knew exactly where it had to happen. The elevator at Blackwood Tower, the 25th floor, where it had all begun. But he needed accomplices, and who better than the two children who had changed his life? You must keep this an absolute secret, Harrison told Jasper and Ruby one afternoon while Pearl was busy in the kitchen. You can't tell your mother, not a single word. Ruby bounced on her toes, eyes blazing with excitement. Daddy is going to propose to Mom? Like in the movies? With a ring? With flowers? With music? Shh. Jasper clapped a hand over his sister's mouth. Be quiet. She will hear you. Ruby covered her own mouth with both hands and nodded furiously, though her eyes still sparkled like fireworks. Harrison looked at them and felt that familiar warmth rise in his chest. A year ago, he had not known they existed. Now he could not imagine breathing without them. The days that followed tested Ruby's ability to keep a secret. The first near disaster came when Pearl asked why Ruby kept giggling every time she looked at her father. Ruby opened her mouth and began, "Because Daddy is going to," and Jasper cut in swiftly. "Because Dad promised to buy us ice cream." "Right, Ruby?" Ruby seized the lifeline. "Yes. Ice cream. Chocolate ice cream." Pearl eyed them suspiciously but let it go. The second time, Ruby drew a picture of her parents dressed as bride and groom. Pearl saw it and laughed. "What are you drawing?" Ruby turned red and stammered. Jasper grabbed the paper and tore it in half. "Her drawing is terrible. I will teach her how to draw it properly." Ruby pouted but understood and nodded. The third near catastrophe happened at dinner. Ruby suddenly asked, "Mom, do you like pearl rings?" The air froze. Harrison nearly choked on his water. Jasper kicked his sister under the table. Pearl looked at Ruby in surprise. "Why do you ask?" I... Ruby glanced around for help. "I read it in a book. The book said pearls are beautiful. I was just curious." Pearl smiled and smoothed her daughter's hair. "Yes, I like pearls. Pearls are very beautiful." That night Harrison exhaled in relief. That had been close. At last the special day arrived. Harrison told Pearl that morning in a voice as casual as if discussing the weather. "I need to bring you to the tower today. There is something important I must handle, and I would like you with me." Pearl suspected nothing. Recently, he had begun involving her in more decisions at Blackwood Holdings, as though gently guiding her into the new life he was building. "All right. What about the children?" "Sterling will bring them later. They will be looked after." Pearl nodded, changed her clothes, and left with him. Blackwood Tower rose over Manhattan, the late afternoon sun flashing against its glass facade. Harrison led Pearl through the lobby, nodding to employees who bowed respectfully. They stepped into the private elevator. The doors closed. The car began to ascend. Pearl stood beside him, watching the numbers climb. 10, 15, 20. The elevator stopped at 25. Pearl frowned. This was not Harrison's office floor. The doors opened, and she froze. Jasper and Ruby stood in the hallway. Ruby held a bouquet of red roses nearly half her size. Jasper held a small hand-lettered sign that read, "Mom, look behind you." Pearl turned, and the world stopped. Harrison was on one knee, holding a small black velvet box already open. Inside rested the ring, the white pearl glowing softly beneath the elevator lights. "1 year ago," Harrison began, his voice deep and trembling in a way he had never imagined possible. "2 children stepped into this elevator, on this very floor, and said 6 words that changed my life. They said, 'You are our father.'" Pearl covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. "Today I kneel here, where it all began, and tell you that I found my family. I found my home, and my home is you. It is the children. It is everything we have built together." Harrison lifted the ring slightly. "Pearl Ashford, will you?" "Say yes, Mom," Ruby burst out, unable to contain herself. "Dad is getting old. His knee must hurt." "Ruby," Jasper hissed, tugging at her arm. "Let him finish." "But he has been kneeling a long time," Ruby protested. Laughter filled the elevator. Even Sterling, stationed discreetly at a distance, had to turn away to hide his smile. Pearl laughed through her tears and looked at Harrison, still kneeling with an expression that was both amused and radiant with love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes. Yes. 1,000,000 times yes." Harrison slid the ring onto Pearl's finger and rose to embrace her. Ruby and Jasper rushed forward, wrapping their arms around both parents. The 4 of them stood in that small elevator on the 25th floor of Blackwood Tower, the place where fate had reunited them a year before. And Harrison Blackwood, the Reaper, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast of the United States, cried, for the second time in 1 year, for the first time in 20 years before that. Not from pain, not from loss, but from happiness, because at last he had found where he belonged. 3 months after the proposal, the rooftop of Blackwood Tower was transformed into a fairy tale garden suspended above Manhattan. White roses and soft strands of light shimmered everywhere, yet nothing felt extravagant or ostentatious. It was simple, warm, filled with love. This was the very place where, a year earlier, Harrison had walked out of a critical meeting to chase after 2 unknown children who had stepped into his elevator and called him Dad. Now it was the place where he would speak his vows to the woman who had given him those children. The wedding was small, no more than 30 guests, no Mafia bosses in attendance, no deals whispered in shadowed corners, no armed guards lining the walls, only family and the people who mattered most. Jasper and Ruby stood proudly as best man and flower girl, so serious it was as if they were carrying out a mission to save the world. Ruby held her small bouquet in both hands and walked with exaggerated care, eyes fixed on the petals as though they might fall if she lost concentration. Jasper carried the small pillow with the rings, his back straight, his expression solemn as a professional bodyguard. He had practiced holding that pillow all week, determined that under no circumstances would he drop the rings. Maggie sat in the front row, her handkerchief soaked through with tears. She had begun crying the moment Pearl appeared in her simple white gown, and had not stopped since. "My girl is getting married," she kept telling whoever happened to sit beside her, whether they listened or not. "I raised her from the time she was 3, and now she is getting married." Sterling stood at Harrison's side as witness. For the first time in 15 years working together, he wore a suit without carrying a weapon, and for the first time, his smile was genuine. Not the polite curve used in negotiations, not the thin line that accompanied orders, but the smile of a man watching his boss find happiness. Soft music drifted through the evening air as Pearl walked toward Harrison. She was breathtaking in her simple white dress, her brown hair swept up with a few loose strands brushing her cheek. The pearl on her finger caught the lights and glowed. Harrison looked at her and forgot how to breathe. The officiant began speaking, but Harrison barely heard a word. He saw only Pearl, her shining brown eyes, the smile forming on her lips. Then it was time for the vows. Harrison took her hands in his. His voice was deep and steady. "I promise to choose this family every day. Not out of duty, but because this is where I want to be. I promise to build a future with you and with our children. No more shadows, only the light you brought into my life." Pearl tightened her grip on his hands. Her voice trembled softly but held firm. "I promise to believe in second chances, to believe in you, to believe in us. I promise I will not run anymore, because you are my home." They exchanged rings, and when the officiant declared, "You may now kiss the bride," Harrison did not wait a second. Jasper immediately covered Ruby's eyes. Ruby shoved his hand away at once. "I can look, I am 8 years old, but cover your own eyes." Laughter rippled through the guests. Even Harrison and Pearl laughed into their kiss. The small reception followed on the rooftop beneath the night sky. The food was simple and delicious. Wine for the adults, fruit juice for the children. Soft music played from modest speakers. After a few glasses of wine, Sterling began telling stories about Harrison from years past. "You know, he used to be terrifying. Once he made a drug dealer drop to his knees just by looking at him. Just one look." Harrison turned that very look on Sterling. Sterling grinned, utterly unafraid. "That look. Exactly that one. But it does not work on me anymore. I have seen him wearing a pink apron burning 3 batches of cupcakes in a row. Not so frightening now." The guests burst into laughter. Harrison shook his head in resignation, though the corner of his mouth lifted. Ruby tugged at her father's hand, demanding a dance. Jasper reluctantly danced with his mother after Pearl pleaded with him. The 4 of them moved together on the rooftop under a sky scattered with stars, Manhattan glittering below. When the music faded, the children ran off to sit with Maggie. Harrison slipped his arms around Pearl from behind, and together they looked out over the city lights. "I used to think I had everything," Harrison said quietly. "Power, money, an empire. I thought that was success." He held her closer. "The truth is, I had nothing. Nothing that truly mattered. Not until you and the children." Pearl leaned back against his chest. "Now you have everything." Harrison pressed a kiss to her hair. "Now I have everything." 1 year after the wedding, life for the Blackwood family had become something entirely different. Harrison had withdrawn completely from the underworld. Blackwood Holdings was now a legitimate real estate and casino corporation, run by teams of attorneys and accountants, instead of gunmen and rivals. Sterling remained at his side, though now as head of security for a clean corporation, no longer the right hand of a mafia boss. Sweet Pearl Bakery had opened its 3rd location, this time in Manhattan. Pearl was the official owner, while Harrison jokingly referred to himself as a part-time kitchen assistant every weekend. He still burned pastries with alarming consistency, still managed to set off the fire alarm at least once a month, and Ruby and Jasper had grown used to it. They considered it a family tradition. Jasper, 9 years old, stood at the top of his class in every subject. He had declared that he intended to become a lawyer one day, so he could put bad people in prison the right way, according to the law. Harrison was not entirely sure whether he should feel proud or concerned, but he chose pride. Ruby, also 9, covered every wall Pearl allowed her to with bright drawings. She wanted to be an artist. She also wanted to bake like her mother. Every weekend she stood beside Pearl in the kitchen, learning how to knead dough and decorate cakes, while Harrison wisely kept a safe distance to avoid starting another fire. One quiet weekend afternoon, the entire family went to Blackwood Tower for dinner at the rooftop restaurant. The 4 of them stepped into the private elevator. The doors closed, and the car began its smooth ascent. Ruby studied the panel of buttons, her small finger brushing lightly over the numbers until she paused at 25. "Dad, this is where Jasper and I found you, right?" Harrison looked down at her and smiled. "That is right. The 25th floor, the place where you walked in and changed my life." Jasper stood beside him, gray eyes identical to his father's. "Dad, what if we had not been brave enough to come find you that day?" Harrison was silent for a moment. He looked at Pearl. He looked at Jasper. He looked at Ruby. The 3 most important people in his life stood with him in this very elevator. He knelt and gathered them into his arms. Then I would be the richest man in the world, he said softly, and also the poorest, because I would not have you. Ruby tightened her arms around his neck. Now you have us. Jasper nodded. And Mom. Pearl rested her hand on Harrison's shoulder and smiled. And a family. Harrison held them closer, feeling the warmth of the people he loved. I have everything. The elevator descended and stopped at the first floor. The doors opened to the bright lobby of Blackwood Tower, sunlight streaming through the glass in the final golden stretch of late afternoon. The family of 4 stepped out hand in hand, Ruby to Harrison's left, Jasper to his right. Pearl's fingers woven through his. Employees bowed their heads respectfully as they passed, but Harrison no longer noticed. He saw only the 3 people beside him, and he knew they were all he would ever need. 2 children had found him in that elevator. They had walked in holding a magazine photograph and a crayon drawing, braver than anyone he had encountered in 20 years of ruling the underworld. And in finding him, they had helped him find himself. The Reaper was gone. The most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast no longer existed. But Harrison, Blackwood, husband, father, a man Pearl could trust with her whole life, would endure. Because sometimes the things that change your life don't come from power or wealth. They don't come from empires or victorious battles. They come from the simplest moments. Like 2 children holding hands, stepping bravely into an elevator, and speaking 6 quiet words. You are our father. This story offers a profound reminder of the value of family and love. No matter who you are, no matter how powerful or wealthy, without the people who love you, everything else becomes hollow. Harrison possessed an empire and commanded fear, yet he was empty until 2 children walked into his life. Pearl, no matter how difficult her circumstances, raised her children alone with strength and dignity, proving that a mother's love can endure any hardship. The story also reminds us of the power of second chances. No one is perfect. Everyone carries a past. What matters most is who we choose to become in the present and in the future. Harrison chose to change. He chose to leave the shadows and step into the light, and that choice brought him true happiness. And you, how does this story make you feel? In real life, do you believe in second chances? Has someone ever changed your life simply by walking into it? We would truly love to hear what rests in your heart. Please leave a comment below and share your own story. If this story touched you, press the like button to support us. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will not miss the next moving story each day. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.